Really happy to be here with Mira Rao. We've actually been looking forward to this conversation for a while because Mira does amazing work helping people. What we're going to talk about is basically how do we really get to the state of authentic expression of ourselves. I mean, those of you who watch me know I love talking about authentic, business and expression. But it's like the thing that I don't talk about nearly enough anywhere really is the stuff that we're going to talk about today with Mira, which is what is keeping people often from being able to be really authentic in their goal setting and in their expression. So Mira, thank you so much for being here.
My absolute pleasure. Thank you for inviting me, George. I'm really looking forward to our chat.
Yeah. So let me just share a little bit about your background, and then we'll get into the conversation. So, Mira, you've got 25 years of yoga practice experience and also teaching yoga and body-based therapy for 10 years. So amazing. You've got, you've studied linguistics, journalism, business. Now you're actually doing an advanced degree in counseling from Notre Dame University. Clients are seeking you out especially when they're burnt out on, getting stuck in the past with therapy. And yet when they get into coaching, sometimes it feels like they're whitewashing their pain with toxic positivity, which we'll talk about. So you teach your clients how to develop practical ways to develop routines, rituals for embodied resilience, so that they can work through unresolved traumas, deal better with challenges and stress, and then really start moving towards what they really want in their lives. So thank you for the work you do. And I want to start with this dichotomy between therapy and coaching. Let's start there, if that's okay, because there are a lot of people watching this who are coaches, and there are a lot of people watching this who have some kind of therapeutic background or who certainly have done therapy. So what is your point of view on this? What's going on with that dichotomy, that tension there?
Beautiful. Thank you for the question. And essentially, so myself as well have been involved in these worlds for a very long time, and I've been observing what is this balance. And to me, it looks like a continuum where in the therapeutic world and the history of therapy has been very much about what's wrong, where's the splinter, what's causing your pain, and how do we go in there and extract things and take it out and heal. And then coaching's really been about, well, what makes you come alive? Where is your thriving? How do you flourish in your life? And let's put in place those things so that you can move forward. And yet what I've seen play out in my own life, those of my clients, is that there needs to be a bit more of a bridge. So in the coaching, we're on the outside, we're in strategy. And in the therapy, we're often very, very internalized. And there are pitfalls in both of those things if we're too much at one end of the continuum or the other. So we can be very navel gazing and focused on our pain and get stuck there in a kind of wallowing experience. Or we can be moving into these goals, but not really feeling like our whole humanity is getting embraced and seen. And the wounds that are getting in the way of taking those steps forward might not be attended to if we're just like, come on, push yourself, in that really kind of dynamic goal-oriented coaching influenced philosophical way. So that's what I've observed. And that's what I'm trying to do, is find that bridge in this kind of work.
Right. Beautiful. A couple of terms we probably should define at the start of this conversation. Trauma. I mean, I know that is an increasingly popular idea in the past couple of years, but I think it would be good to hear from your point of view what you consider trauma to be, but also self-regulation. A lot of us, those of us who have done some of this work, we just kind of like, it just comes out when we say these things, but it's good to get on the same page with it. Of course, talk about polyvagal theory and any other kind of like major terms. I'm just looking at my notes here that you think is important, but let's start with those: trauma, self-regulation, polyvagal theory. Anywhere you like to start there?
Beautiful. Thank you. Yeah, I think that's a great place to start, because trauma has been traditionally a little bit of a scary word. And people are like, oh, that hasn't happened to me, because they think about something really, really huge.
Like you have to have your both your legs cut off, then that's trauma.
Exactly. Like on the physical level, that's right. Like some major accident, car accident, something like that. Or on the emotional level, severe, significant long-term abuse. That's kind of what people have mapped in their heads is like, that's trauma, which it is. And yet the working definition that's much more encompassing again of the real human experience is simply an experience in our life in which our nervous system was overwhelmed and unable to cope. And that can come through a variety of reasons. But essentially, if our nervous system perceives some kind of threat and we can't respond effectively to that threat, then it becomes an overwhelming experience in which we shut down, we clamp down that experience in our bodies, and then we internally have like a dissociated, like pain internalized experience. So that's trauma. It's basically that I didn't have in that moment that the thing happened. It could have been a small thing, just like for a lot of people, it's more like emotional neglect. So in that moment, I wasn't being attended to. My nervous system couldn't cope with that, because for a child, that's a really distressing thing. And therefore, I registered it as an experience that was too much for my system. I felt too alone. I felt too isolated, and I shut down. So that's my resources weren't sufficient to meet the stress load that was coming onto my system from that experience.
Now that you've described it, I mean, all of us have experienced multiple moments of trauma throughout our childhood. Thank you for saying that, because I think that's much clearer, even to me, than I had heard it before. Throughout our childhood, which is of course our formative years, that's when a lot of our, I guess, response to stress developed, right? And our perhaps limiting beliefs or blocks, or got created. And then also, just as adults, we have traumatic experiences that further maybe solidify some of those limits that we put on ourselves, or less healthier responses. But okay, so you've got this. Thank you for defining that. Now, self-regulation has become, well, I guess maybe in our circles, I've seen it more and more, but I think just for all of us, for the viewer and just for this conversation, what's self-regulation in your viewpoint?
Sure. I want to start just to that point, George. I was watching, there's somebody I really admire in the trauma recovery world called Maston Kipp, and he was laughing. He was doing an interview with another woman called Sarah Baldwin, who's also amazing in this field. And he turns to the audience, he goes, oh, you're so well regulated. And he's like, in our industry, that's like the highest compliment.
Right, exactly. It's like inside jargon for like, you're amazing. Yeah.
So I want to come back to defining again, because I gave you a lot of words, but I think that I really like this image. So, resilience is this, is the capacity to bend. Here's the stress load coming on. So even if you just replace the word trauma with stress, because they're very similar in the way they're responding in the system, and then this is stress, right? And this is resilience, and that's trauma. So I'm such an embodiment person. So that for me, like, oh, I feel that when the resilience becomes overwhelmed and our level of resources is not sufficient to meet the level of stress, this happens, right? So regulation is the capacity to recognize the level of stress that's coming in, how threatening it really is, and to balance it with a sufficient amount of resources so you maintain this happening. So that's the kind of framework of it. And then in a practical, pragmatic, like, what does that mean on a day-to-day basis? It means being able to take a breath, what you do and demonstrate so beautifully, to soften your body, to feel those like jarring spurts of energy that might have come in some sort of reaction to something. And then to be able to go, oh, that's my nervous system operating. Beautiful. It's giving me information. Then to come into your prefrontal cortex, into the reasoning, rational part of your brain, and go, do I need to run away from this thing, or, like have some kind of intense reaction? Or do I need to actually keep calm and relate to this situation differently? That's kind of how I would look at self-regulation.
That's a brilliant way of doing it. I have never, that's just so simple and it makes a lot of sense. And this is something you can demonstrate to anybody because just with your hand, you could do this. That's
Yes.
amazing. And that's a nice kind of pick mental model for ourselves to, yeah. So, all right. Well, one more term, and then we'll get into more of this conversation about authenticity, which is polyvagal theory. Yet another idea that's I've seen more and more,
Yeah.
and I kind of feel like I haven't studied it, but I feel like I kind of get it. But please explain, what is
Yeah.
polyvagal theory, and why is that important?
Sorry, Josh. Um, Yes, I was realizing because a lot of people you work with and around are starting to become quite passionate, right? So we've had
Right.
some chats about it. Essentially, it's Stephen Porges was the academic who created the theory. And essentially, prior to his work, we really became familiar. We saw the stress response as purely the fight or flight response. And that was promoted amongst the trauma community. That was how the stress response, the trauma response worked in the body, as far as we understood to that point. However, there were a lot of people who had experienced traumas who'd experienced different states as well from that. So they experienced what we now know as a freeze response in the body. And as he started to look at, well, what's really going on, he started to see this relationship of the vagal nerve. Okay, so that runs from brainstem up into the face and down through the body, down through your heart and into your gut and viscera down there. And it governs a lot of our bodily responses. And he started to see that there was an aspect of the vagus nerve which influenced that freeze response. Then there was the sympathetic, which is actually a different branch of the nervous system that governed the fight, flight, freeze response. And these developed in order evolutionarily. So the freeze response is kind of our lizard ancestor response. It's the
Wow,
shutdown.
that's fascinating. That's
Yeah.
really cool. Like I'm getting goosebumps as you talk through this because that, yeah, keep going, keep
It
going.
makes sense, doesn't
Yeah,
it? That's
yeah.
yeah. So we first had that available to us. Then as we became more active and engaged in the world, we had the stress response, the fight flight response. Then as we became more engaged in community, the vagus nerve, which governs much more the down regulation of the nervous system, so it makes more sleepiness and relaxation come into the body in different forms. The ventral vagal aspect, so the higher aspect between the heart and the face, governs our social engagement complex of our nervous system. So, how do we feel safe? We feel safe when we see a soft expression on someone's face or in their eyes or a smile. So the vagus nerve essentially is the primary regulator of our nervous experience, of our nervous system states. And when we register threat, we'll go down the hierarchy. So when we're safe, we're in connection with people. Threat is registered, we'll go down into fight, flight. If that doesn't work to get us back into safety, we go down to freeze, into our primal kind of nervous system state and experience. And what polyvagal theory does in its applied form, teach you how to recognize those different states, teach you how to understand what got you to those different states, and teach you how to get out of when you're in the stress responses and back into the social engagement system, and to spend more time there, which will segue into what we're going to talk about real authentic goals.
Yeah, wow, that's so powerful. So, okay, let's get into this. Now that we've got the background information, why is it, well, from your point of view, a lot of people are setting goals that aren't really, and I mean, we've heard this. It's like, is that really my goal? Is that just like an authority figure? It's like, am I just trying to please my, parents? Or is it, am I trying to make my, partner happy or fulfill some kind of societal standard that makes me feel like I'm worthwhile to be here? I mean, we've heard that for many years, but now you're putting sort of this wonderful, like deep psychological, biological underpinnings to this, and the way to actually find our authentic truth. So let's talk about this. What is your perspective on this?
So my perspective on this is that particularly in our Western society, the idea of being truly authentic. So when we're in our ventral vagal state and we're able to be really authentic, the ideal is that people can meet us in that way. But most people are carrying unresolved traumas. So there tends to be a lot of reactivity. And as children, if that experience is not met, then we don't get that experience of safety. So if I come to you as a child with a full open heart and wanting to express my creative joy, and I get shut down, or I get criticized, or I get laughed at, that is not going to be a safe experience for me. So even being in a ventral vagal state of expression, if that's been our experience growing up, isn't necessarily going to be perceived and recognized as safe by our systems. So we are constantly trying to react to the threat of that exposure to our vulnerable, authentic selves by doing things that create some sort of okayness in the other person that allow us to get some measure of safety. So most of our actions, decisions, our real formation of our identity and self is done in that reactive way. It's just all about trying to get safe. And then when we try to achieve things in our lives, we're coming from this, am I safe? Am I safe? Am I safe? Am I safe? No, it's not safe to be myself. I better do this thing that allows that other person to be comfortable so that I can get some comfort.
Yeah. People pleasing.
Yes, AKA people pleasing.
Oh my goodness. I mean, the way that you've described it it makes so much sense. It's not some, it's not a personality flaw. Like you just don't like judge yourself or judge someone else. Oh, they're a people pleaser. Well, what does that, why? What does that really mean? Like how did that happen? And you're giving us that theoretical underpinning of it. So no judgment is needed. No condemnation is needed. What's needed is understanding. And so say more. So what happens now? Okay, now you, as a child, you expressed yourself, as who you are, weren't accepted fully for that. And what happens as we grow up? We develop these defense mechanisms, or rather response mechanisms to make sure they're the person. So then now I'm telling everybody, build an authentic business, do marketing authentically. And why is that hard?
What a good point, George. Yeah. I mean, I kind of want to interview you. I'm like, I want to break out and ask, do you experience that people actually find the idea of authenticity really uncomfortable? Is that something that happens?
Oh, yeah. Thank you for asking, because I want to, yes. I think the most common, probably the most common experience I hear from people is, I can't show up on video. I can't. And you could tell, Mira, you and I are both quite comfortable now on video, but as you know, a little bit of my story, it took me a long time. It took me years to become comfortable on video. And I don't know about your story, but it's like, yeah. So showing up on video and to do it from a fully comfortable, authentically powerful state, like your real self state, your best self, your highest best self state, being able to be expressed. But the other, just generally, just being visible in their business, like they feel so shy is not quite the right word, but you know what I'm talking about. So what do you think is happening there?
Yeah, so to me, the word is unsafe. So
Yes.
the idea of the vulnerability of truly expressing, because expression of one's true self and true character and true emotions, there is a vulnerability in that. That's just the nature of it. So being connected from a polyvagal theory within the ventral vagal state means having a sense of trust of being met in that vulnerability. So I think when people have not had that experience, all of this, I actually think there are a couple of things that are going on. So one is there'll be nervous system patterns, so we were talking about this, you and I, about your story and mine. And for me, the biggest area where I really felt that challenge and that resistance to the internal push to express my true self was in my music performances. And it was being that vulnerable, that visible, that exposed was so reminiscent of different experiences where I tried to do that and I was shut down. So it automatically felt like, oh my God, this is a threatening experience, in terms of the body memory that I had of trying to do that. The other thing that I think also happens is that it's unfamiliar. So the idea of being in an authentic state and of being expansive and self-expressed is actually unfamiliar to most of us. It's not modeled in our society. It's not what we've experienced. And anything that's unfamiliar also can register as a threat. And this is where the goal setting gets complicated, because it's like, well, why, if I really want it, do I get so scared of it or feel so bad about it? And why, when I have something positive happen in my life, do I have this kind of weird response to it? Because the nervous system needs to kind of expand and get more flexible and get used to also experiencing the positivity of authentic expression.
Oh my goodness. I mean, you just brought up another really important, I guess, emotional block that a lot of people probably don't even realize they have, which is the block of receiving abundance or receiving two things, especially as we start building our business and we do it, skillfully. We have to learn how to receive, number one, praise from, our clients or our audience, or, but number two, money. Like, isn't there, don't you think there's something here with people who, now it's funny because as you know, I like to talk about, charging from a state of enoughness and compassion. But at the same time, sometimes I see my, students and clients are like, I'm like, even though I talk about charging from enough, you're still not charging enough. Like you're somehow afraid to receive, plenty of money. It's but so talk about this. Like, is there something going on there with regards to the freeze, fight, flight, or just your point of view here?
No, totally. I mean, I think I'd still see that as a pretty similar thing, where if we're coming from, there could be a few things, because I haven't thought about it so much through this lens, but if we're coming from a state of protection, then being small is the best protective mechanism we have. So anything that makes us visible, anything that makes us bigger within our lives, is going to feel like a threat. So accepting in that money, there's the unfamiliarity of it, if we've come from these kind of deprived or deprivation kind of backgrounds and experiences. And then there's also this aspect of, oh, I'm larger, I'm more visible, that's not going to be safe. So it's always, as soon as we put that lens of like past experiences, conditioning, and safety over things, like you said, it brings such a degree. And that's why I love polyvagal. It's like, there's nothing broken, there's nothing wrong. Your survival system is working exactly as it's meant to. It's just that we live in a bit of a whacked out society, to be honest, that doesn't really celebrate humanity very well and the true emotional experience. And so, you're just going to need to tweak it a little bit, to start to realize, oh, this is actually safe now. If I can grow and heal, then there's a capacity for me to have safety in my self-expression. And that's where the self-regulation comes in, because we're not so reliant on regulating with others.
Oh, beautiful. Yes, that's, the more people understand this, the more we can accept ourselves and accept each other, and be good to each other, essentially, like understanding, okay, this is how many of us grow up without that kind of safety. Well, everybody pretty much, they're always unsafe situations. But okay, so what is, let's move into, well, what do we do about it? Okay, so a common prescription these days, for any kind of mental health issues, well, just meditate. You just got to meditate more. Right? What do you say about that?
Yes.
Meditation fixes everything.
Yes. How much could I say about that? So much. So it's funny, because for myself, like, meditation has been a really important part of the journey.
Yes, of course, for many of us. Yes.
Yeah, but I loved hearing you talk about that. Like, oh, I don't meditate. I don't sit down on my cushion to meditate at this particular time. It's more of a falling into that kind of state in my resting periods, or through a breath, or through a thing. And so one of the things that fascinated me, there's a few things. You can actually what do I want to tell you, George? I'm thinking about how to keep this topic, how to bring this topic most saliently alive in this moment. The piece that really fascinated me, the discovery I came across, because I actually had really positive experiences with meditation, but I was talking with a lot of friends who were like, I just can't meditate. It's too uncomfortable. It's too this. It's there was lots of struggles. My body, and many people were finding, so this is the key, that their bodies were just reacting, to that stillness. There was like, oh, the stillness isn't safe, and all this stuff would happen. And so then they might actually end up dissociating, so disconnecting from the sensations in their body. And what I learned from, again, one of my mentors is a woman called Sarah Payton, who does a lot of neuroscience, relational neuroscience, and looks at the structure of the brain in connection to the nervous system, is that there's an aspect of our brain called the default mode network. And this is the part of the brain that is switched on when you're not actively engaged in a task. So when you're not trying to do something and you're just kind of sitting back into yourself, the place that will come alive is the default mode network. For someone that's had reasonably good parenting and life experiences and growing up in a good enough environment, safe enough, that part of the brain is relatively warm, in the sense that the voices they'll hear in their head are like, oh, life's okay, I'm pretty cool, I'm all right with myself, da da da. If we've had these, which many of us have, traumatic experiences, then the default mode network becomes hostile. So, and many of us are experienced with this, right? Going into that, like, oh, I'm not busy with anything, which is part of the endemic of busyness, is people want to get away from that voice, right? That's like, okay, if I'm not busy, I don't want to swear, but you piece of, that's what we hear in that aspect of our brain. It can be very critical. I think the statistic that I read was small but significant, was about 10% of the population. That segment of the brain, the synaptic connections that form the default mode network, don't actually respond, don't shift and change when mindfulness meditation is introduced. So
it doesn't?
It doesn't.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah. Right, because the whole idea is we change synaptic connections in the brain with meditation, right?
Yeah.
But for some people, that particular aspect that regulates that kind of self-critical voice, mindfulness meditation doesn't touch it.
Wow.
Doesn't actually change. And so we need different types of tools if that's what we've got going on in our head than just pure observation.
Sorry, I was just muted. Self-regulation then, right? I mean, like what is, I mean, we haven't even started talking about embodiment. I feel like, I mean, we have, but maybe just for a moment here, what to you is embodiment or embodied practice? I think many of us have heard about that, but yeah.
For me, because I think it's, again, one of those terms, so I'm glad we're defining it now. Yes. I think different people might use it in different ways. So for me, it definitely relates to this sense of having a conscious awareness of what is happening in the body through the lens of the nervous system and understanding our biology. So for me, embodiment is, I'm a human creature and I experience the world through my body like everybody else. So it's having that awareness and that understanding combined with the capacity to feel into sensations. So for many people, either they've learnt that mindfulness technique, and for me it was Vipassana meditation, which kind of is super helpful, but has this kind of cool observation, right? But if you think about trauma, which has been, I've gone through something that's overwhelmed me, and then I haven't had that resonance with another human being to help me kind of return to a sense of safety, that cool observation is just the same experience. It's like this detached coldness. So having this capacity to be warm towards and with the internal states of the body and to be able to tolerate them. Because if there's trauma there and the nervous system is highly dysregulated, the intensity of the experiences that can come up in relation to something that would rationally appear quite small can be quite scary and overwhelming. So I can even tell you, I sort of want to share, because I remember it's a long time ago when I first started coming across this, and I had a history and patterns with people, older women, and there was a kind of thing going on. And I'd had disapproval from somebody. And I said to this person, I was like, you know, when like someone criticizes you and you feel like your whole body's on fire and your legs can't move and you want to sink into the ground? And she was like, no, I don't know what you're talking about. And I was like, oh, right. Not everybody has the same intensity and level of experiences of sensation to the body. Right. So but the people I work with, when there's been significant disempowerment or traumatic experiences going on, then they do. And often people who don't, it's not because they're not there, it's because they've been numbed by addictive tendencies of all sorts. So people don't want to feel that stuff because it's hard to feel, and they push it down. So we don't want to feel pain. We end up not feeling so much joy and pleasure. So embodiment is really coming back into touch with those sensations, those experiences, having the confidence to understand them, the compassion to understand this is my protective response, taking care of me, giving me information, and then developing that capacity to interpret the information and put it to good use in your life and decisions.
Beautiful. So when you work with clients, what are some of the practices that you actually help them to, do on a regular basis? Because of course, if we actually want to heal in a way that is, sustainable and not just like a one-time thing, it needs, am I right to say it needs to become a practice, like something that we do on a regular basis, right? So what give us a sense, just give us a little taste of what are some of the practices that you always encourage clients to do?
Yeah, so the word I use for that process, George, is integration. So
yes,
for most clients, there hasn't been an experience of safety. It's not really something they may have ever really truly had in their lives, either by themselves or with another person. But essentially for all of us, it needs to happen with another person first. Then we internalize that capacity to offer that to ourselves. And many people have never had it. So the therapeutic relationship is one in which that experience of being safe, so back to polyvagal, ventral vagal experience, social engagement and connection, is felt for perhaps the first time in a really deeply genuine way for that person. Okay, this is what it feels like to be safe. The times between sessions are the integration of like, how do I bring that state back into my day-to-day life? How do I begin to have agency in regulating, self-regulation, to bring that state into my day-to-day world? And this is where the nervous system tools come in, and the brain, understanding the brain science comes in so beautifully, and to experience it through the body. So I teach really simple little, I don't like the word hacks, but little tools for bringing all of that together. So bringing the conscious mind, bringing the body, bringing the understanding, bringing the sensations all together. So I think I've even showed you this one before, but this is one of my favorites. And I'm big on the accessibility and practicality and applicability in the moment of things. So I had this 25 years of yoga history. I practiced yoga for years, and I still was not finding the capacity to translate that experience from the yoga class of peace into like a spot moment in my day-to-day life. I was like, oh, I'm feeling angry and upset. I better go do 30 minutes of asana or 20 minutes of pranayama, and breathing. I couldn't do that. So these are like little capsules of yoga almost. I just thought of that. I hadn't thought about it before.
Yeah. So like a minimum like a homeopathy of yoga.
yeah, it's like the little drop. Oh, okay, I've got a little drop of that medicine. So I like to think about all my tools that I can carry them in the palm of my hand, and understanding my hand as a model of my brain. So here is, I teach clients this all the time as a really helpful one for when they're feeling dysregulated, to be able to go, oh, I remember this is how my nervous system is working. My brain stem is here. Here's my spine, my brain stem. Here is my limbic system, which is connected to our emotions, which is connected to the parts of the brain that register the alarm system. And here is my cortex and prefrontal cortex. So the limbic system and the amygdala, the little part of the brain that really detects threats, lives deep down inside the middle of the brain. So it tucks in here and the cortex wraps around it. So I like to think about it when I'm dysregulated, it's like this, my brain is feeling all kind of separate from each other. And then my prefrontal cortex is part of my body and my brain, which is the rational, sensible, well-reasoned part, can come and just hold this part. So my emotional self and my logical self are working together, are being held together. And then it's an actual bodily experience, right? So we're holding the thumb. You think about infants doing this. There's a very physiological, soothing experience of doing this and going, okay, and then knowing it's visually represented outside of myself. So you can get that moment of space. It's not just happening so much inside me that it's overwhelming. You can get that bit of space from it. Okay, you're just having a bit of a hard time right now. Emotional limbic system and emotional and nervous system. I'm a bit distressed. I'm just going to give you a little hug and it's okay. And this helps people, like you were saying before, not judge what's happening inside them, but bring instant compassion to it. So that's one of my absolute favorites. And all these, like a little bit of a self-hug, something that just contains like, oh, my body's here. Because if people have had trauma, the sense of containment of self and this like, oh, boundaries between me and other people is not as strong. So we just need to go, okay. And if they've been practicing and learning some of the other tools, and it's like, okay, here's my body, here's the outside of my body, and I can own and regulate what's going on inside of it. That's a couple of really.
Yeah. For those who are listening to this on the podcast, I hope you'll watch this video, but because I think the what you're showing us with your body is helpful experience. So back to the authentic goal setting. So now we have a sense of why we have a hard time being authentic in our expression. But what about goals? I mean, why might we not be setting goals that are actually truly what we want? A lot of people don't even know what they want, right? Like, what's your perspective on that?
Because they don't know who they are, because for most of their lives, they are a collection of reactions,
right,
and of their nervous system trying to keep them safe. So like we talked about before, when they tried to express themselves authentically, they were shut down. So they're like, oh, I'm not going to do that because that's going to separate me from other people. So I better do these other things, which at least don't get me criticized or yelled at or whatever it is that are our particular experiences. So they don't, many people with, and I include myself in this, in my past and my history, they call it the false self. We're operating out of a shell, really, that lives on the outside of our true authentic self, which is all a collection of the coping strategies, of the protecting strategies. And again, no judgment. Thank goodness. For many people, that was their survival, that stuff that happened, that to form that false self was needed because it wasn't safe to be the true self. So we love this part, we honor this part, but they don't really know what lives behind it inside the depths of their true self. And when they try to go there, all of these protective mechanisms block that and stop that. So it's quite challenging initially when you start doing the healing work to actually go, who am I and what do I truly want?
Wow. And this brings us to, this is part of the work that you do with clients. And I hope those who are listening and watching can, if anyone resonates, contact Mira for, for possibility of working with her, because this is powerful stuff that affects every area of your business. Yes. Because it's you moving through all these, every day and all these actions. And are you doing it from a place of authentic power? So I want to make sure folks know about your upcoming webinar. And by the way, some people are listening or watching this months from now, but you'll still have the webinar recording available for purchase. So, and I'm sure it's at a reasonable rate. So tell us about this embodied envisioning, right?
Yes.
And how does that relate to what we've been talking about?
Beautiful. So yeah, so essentially the experience of coming together initially is to experience that safety. And in that safety, begin to learn how to self-regulate out of protective states and begin to come in touch with the true self. And once we're in touch with the true self, once we're in the ventral vagal state, once we're in this state of connectedness and possibility, then what comes to us and what we might dream of, we know is more truly connected to the depths of what we truly want. Because it's not coming out of that, oh, I better, as you gave the example, so I better take that college degree so that mum doesn't guilt trip me for the rest of my life, and then I end up having all these sensations that I don't want to deal with, and then I end up smoking to try and not feel those things. So as we start to peel that stuff away and we heal, often there'll be like key traumatic memories that may have occurred to set that pattern really deeply into our nervous system, and we resolve and heal them. Then we begin to know, okay, I can start to envision from this place. We won't go as deep in the webinar, into that stuff. That's more the one-on-one work, but we can begin to touch into, through the webinar process, through the webinar content, into, oh, what does it actually feel like if I start dreaming of my future from this well-regulated place, which most people are not in for very much of the time? What would I actually say if I wasn't scared of what was going to happen as a result of me saying what I truly want? And, oh, I kind of feel like myself right now, then what could that be? So I'll be teaching people how to do that. And we'll be working on, okay, as we talked about, so I set this goal, and what happened, what happens in my body as I start to work towards that goal? And if it feels threatening, there could be dysregulation, there could be emotional distress and experiences that are quite frightening and discouraging for people. Even though they're working towards what they want, the nervous system is going, oh, this is unfamiliar, so I'm going to protect you from it. So it's learning how to put in place, like map that out and put in place the tools that you need to go, oh, no, this is an authentic goal. It's just that it's, like you talked about before, this is me growing into a more abundant and receiving way of being, and my nervous system doesn't feel safe like that. So it's bringing out all the protectors. How am I going to work with them to regulate and to create the safety inside my body so that I can then come into these actions and take these steps towards these goals as I need to?
It's beautiful. So it is about creating an authentic vision for your life, could be for your business, and being able to actually take action on it, understanding the self-regulation needed to continue to manifest that. I hope everyone will consider checking it out. Of course, I will have the link or information below this video or episode for you to check it out. Mira, thank you so much for the work that you do. I hope that this reaches many people so we can all start to have more self-compassion and compassion for others, and be able to actually, express more authentically. So thank you for the work that you do. Tell people where you'd like them to look up your content and information. And of course, links will be below, but you can just verbally share it anyway.
Thank you. Thanks, George. And likewise to you. You and I were chatting about this yesterday, and you said, oh, well, I don't know that I did it consciously, but you are a beautiful demonstration of what a well-regulated nervous system and authentic, that commitment to bringing yourself through the blocks and fears to authentic expression, what that looks like. So thank you. It
just took me 10 times longer than it needed to. So people work with Mira, so you can save yourself those.
Talk about that. Yes, we said it's able to do it with grace and rapidity.
Yes.
Yes, to work through these blocks.
Yeah.
The best place, if anyone's interested in the workshop, if someone's watching this soon in the webinar, I have a little pop-up on my website, which will pop down there. And if they enter their email in there, then I'm sending out information about the webinar that way. If they want to look at my content, the best place is either my personal profile or my business page, which I'll give you the links on Facebook and Instagram as well. So I often publish the same videos on both platforms.
Awesome.
And I'd love,
Great.
and I'm just up for conversation. Like, I'm so passionate about this stuff, and it really is, George, like, it's, for so many people, it's such a nice way to bring that compassion in when you're told, have compassion for yourself, but how? Oh,
Yes.
understanding that this is how I'm meant to be.
Right. Yes. Like having, it's grounded compassion. It's it's not like a fake it till you make it compassion, but it's like, oh, that, no wonder. No wonder.
Exactly.
Yeah. Yeah.
Exactly.
So thank you so much, Mira.
My absolute pleasure. Thanks for having me on today, George. I really appreciate it, and chat as always.